Hello and welcome to FinextraTV. I'm Alex Lippic and I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by Wayne Scott, Global Regulatory Compliance Lead at Escode, and we're going to be discussing financial resilience and preparing for disruption. Wayne, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Really great to see you. Looking forward to today's conversation very much indeed as well. I want to start off by asking, what do organisations most often overlook when it comes to resilience? Let's start there.
You know, I always struggle with bottom line up front, but I'll kind of try and do that here. They often miss the risks of supply failure, service deterioration and concentration risk. If you think about the way in which the vast majority of financial institutions will manage risk, they'll separate it into broadly two categories: financial risk, non-financial risk. Financial risk being investments and liquidity and credit risks, to name some of them. And then non-financial risk is kind of the risks that are presented to the business. Everything else really, conduct risk, operational resilience, third-party risk management, those kind of things. They tend to focus on the resilience of the service and not necessarily the resilience of the supplier. Everybody will take a look at, cybersecurity. Everybody gets drawn into cybersecurity. It's easy to understand. It's visceral. You know, we've all been hacked somewhere along the way. And then they'll look at the sort of availability of the service or data integrity of the service too. But the global financial services regulations are very, very clear on this, that there is a responsibility to ensure the resilience of the supplier, and that responsibility remains with the end user. If you think about it, you know, those risks within financial risk, liquidity, credit, market risk, they do still apply to the supply chain. And they just get missed out of it, really. You know, I've been doing this across 3 decades, and I've never met a financial risk expert that focuses on non-financial risk, if that makes sense. It feels a little obscure. But, you know, when you look at market risk, liquidity risk, credit risk, investment risk, you know, they are the main reasons why a supplier will fail. Why a service can probably no longer be maintained, and you know, that's what leads to companies being bought by one company or another, by the intellectual property rights or ownership of a company changing hands. So it's these suppliers, you know, no suppliers are really immune from market forces. It doesn't really matter how big they are. There's a kind of a really good example going on at the moment, continuing for quite some time now within, you know, in the realm of the levels of investment that's going on in artificial intelligence. You know, at some point, these large hyperscalers, these large companies are going to need to start to demonstrate and deliver a return on investment. We talk often about too big to fail, but, you know, we don't necessarily talk often enough about too big to save. You know, banks, financial institutions have to have resolution plans allowing the regulators to bail in, and that's what really needs to be built for the services. An organisation needs to be able to step in and manage that service themselves.
Really interesting to hear your insight on that. You mentioned a lot of risks there, Wayne. There are a lot of different resilience regulations out there in the world at the moment. So how would you say firms are best placed to manage those whilst maintaining that clear, consistent strategy, do you think?
For me, it's about the patterns, and there are commonalities across the different sets of regulations. And there are really big differences. The DORA focuses specifically on ICT risk, whereas the UK regulations take a broader look at the resilience of the entire supply chain. India's regulations will really drill into the payments infrastructure, understandably so. That's where the majority of their growth is. The Saudi Arabian regulations issues guidance to the supplier themselves. America's regulations have no real mention of concentration risk, the idea that big suppliers can fail, that that maybe there could be a flaw in the system itself. And Switzerland's regulations do all of the above in about 18 pages, really precisely and accurately. I often sort of say regulations mirror a sort of national ideology somewhere along the way. But then you've also got the problems that come along with being released at different times. The UK and Singapore kind of led the way 4 or 5 years ago, and then DORA followed on from that. But then there was a bedding in period, a transitional period that came from with the UK regulations. India's and Saudi Arabia's just go live immediately, cope with it, those kind of things. And the US has looked at the majority of their regulations, excluding for the financial services market, but except for securities. And the regulatory regime in the US is subject to governmental shifts in policy. So, but what there is a global regulatory alignment around the recognition of supplier failure, service deterioration and concentration risk on the whole. Those risks are on the whole named, and once they're named, they have to be mitigated and controlled. It's an understanding really that should financial instability hit the technology supply chain, that really does have that potential to turn into operational contagion and then in turn feed into financial contagion within the market. But there are patterns across the board of naming the risks. Somebody's got to own the risk. Whether the people that own the risk know they own the risk is something that we're establishing a little bit more often here. You've got to kind of map the infrastructure, understand how everything's all connected, risk appetites, risk tolerances, where there are risks, build plans, test the plans. And if the plans don't work, you've got a kind of a feedback loop. You've got to learn the lessons from that, improve the operational resilience baseline, if you like, get better and better and better. But overall, across every set of regulations, there's this concept, this idea of proportionality. The cost of mitigating a risk can't really outweigh the value of the system. And that's what we see. That's what we see more and more frequently now, is that Escrow, the solution, is being named with increasing frequency as a key control by the large financial institutions.
Well, I wanted to actually pick you up on that. Talking about Escrow itself, how can that actually help firms manage third-party risks? We touched on it briefly. And particularly if a supplier decides to suddenly exit the frame.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about there are stressed exits. A stressed exit is the process of moving away from a supplier when it was completely unplanned. It's worth highlighting that Escrow is named in way over 50% of the global financial services regulations as the solution to this. Moving away from a piece of software is little more than the procurement procedure and onboarding, testing, those kind of things. But it is a long process. It can be 18 months to 2 years, something like that. So really what you've got to do is you've got to keep the lights on in that time. You've got to carry on using the service even if the supplier no longer exists. And they're the main common reasons is a company will go out of business. So that's what Escrow does, is allows you to carry on using the service. It's what we've been doing since 1984. We do it in 3 stages. We establish a legal agreement called an escrow agreement. Under that, we'll store all the information that you require to carry on using the service, source code, spun down fresh instances of multi-tenanting services, full detailed lists of the hardware and software involved. Then we do a knowledge transfer. We understand that all that information that's stored under the agreement is true and correct. We get them, the supplier concerned, to rebuild it for us. They're the best people to show us. They know it the best. We document that process in an instruction manual and a shopping list, and then the final stage of that is a scenario test. We test, can anybody follow that instruction manual? Can anybody procure that hardware, the software involved? Ultimately what you end up there with then is proof. Proof that you can pull the management of the service in-house or pass the management of the service to another supplier. We identify third-party risks as part of those knowledge transfer processes all the time. Everything from missing source code to outdated hardware. So should the service not be built in a resilient fashion, at a bare minimum, what you've got there are the sort of contractual levers to entice the supplier to improve, or you can make an informed decision on whether to own the risk. It's just about controlling those risks, reducing the impact and the velocity, the total cost of settlement, and building a defendable position should a regulator want any more information.
Fascinating to hear your insight. I want to thank you very much for sharing that with us. It'll be interesting to see how these risk regulatory patterns develop moving forwards. But in the meantime, I really want to thank you for your time, because it's been a pleasure speaking to you. So thank you ever so much, Wayne.
Thank you.